Imagine a business so powerful that it could build armies, declare war, mint its own money, negotiate treaties, seize territory, and execute people. Now imagine that business was publicly traded. Anyone could buy shares: widows, bakers, shopkeepers, sailors, servants. And every one of them wanted the same thing: higher profits, bigger dividends. No questions asked. In the year 1621, on a small group of islands in present-day Indonesia, Dutch Governor-General Jan Pieterszoon Koen stood in a town square. Around him were 44 severed heads. Villages had been burned. Families had been hunted into the mountains. Entire communities had vanished. All for a spice called nutmeg. Back in Amsterdam, shareholders celebrated another successful year. The dividend reports looked fantastic. Production was up. Profits were soaring. The stock price was healthy. Everything was working exactly as planned. The investors never saw the villages. They never heard the screams. They never smelled the smoke. They only saw numbers. And the numbers looked beautiful. This is the story of the Dutch East India Company. The VOC, the company that helped invent modern shareholder capitalism. The company that created the world's first stock market frenzy. The company that pioneered multinational corporate power. And the company that discovered something many corporations would spend centuries perfecting. Human suffering can be extremely profitable. To understand how this happened, we need to go back to a time before corporations, before stock exchanges, before multinational companies. Back to a time when one tiny spice could be worth more than gold. To understand the VOC, we first need to understand why Europe lost its mind over spices. Today, spices are ordinary. You walk into a grocery store and buy pepper for a few dollars. Nutmeg sits quietly on a shelf. Cinnamon gets sprinkled on coffee. Nobody starts wars over it. Nobody crosses oceans for it. Nobody builds empires around it. But in the 16th century, spices were different. Very different. They were luxury goods, status symbols, objects of obsession, a form of wealth. For centuries, European food had been simple, very simple. Large amounts of bread, salted meat, more salt, and occasionally even more salt. Fresh food was difficult to preserve. Refrigeration did not exist. Spices helped improve flavor and, more importantly, signaled status. If you served guests a heavily spiced meal, you weren't just feeding them. You were showing them how wealthy you were. Then travelers, merchants, and crusaders returned from the Middle East, carrying stories of exotic flavors. Pepper, cloves, cinnamon, nutmeg. Suddenly, Europe's aristocracy discovered something revolutionary. Food could actually taste good. Demand exploded. Spices became one of the most valuable commodities on Earth. A wealthy noble displaying exotic spices was the equivalent of driving a supercar today, perhaps even more impressive. Because unlike a luxury car, spices literally disappeared when used. Burning through spices demonstrated that you were rich enough to consume something incredibly expensive without concern. They weren't just ingredients. They were symbols of wealth and power. But there was a problem. Europe didn't control the spice trade. The great trading networks connecting Asia to Europe passed through the Middle East. Venice and the Ottoman Empire sat directly in the middle. Every shipment passed through their hands. Every merchant took a cut. Every middleman raised the price. By the time nutmeg reached Europe, it was worth a fortune, sometimes several hundred times its original value. And when prices become absurd, people start looking for alternatives. European powers reached a simple conclusion. If they couldn't control the trade routes, they would find new ones. So they began searching for a direct path to Asia. This search launched one of the greatest periods of exploration in human history. Portuguese sailors pushed farther and farther down the coast of Africa. Each voyage traveled slightly farther than the last. Each expedition carried enormous risks: storms, disease, shipwrecks, starvation, mutiny, death. yet the rewards were potentially limitless. Eventually, Portugal succeeded. Its sailors rounded the southern tip of Africa and established a sea route to the east. The results were incredible. Portuguese ships returned loaded with spices. Their investors became rich. Their merchants became richer. Their kings became wealthier. And suddenly Portugal controlled one of the most profitable trade networks in the world. For decades, the Dutch were perfectly happy to buy spices from Portugal and avoid the danger themselves. It was easy, it was profitable, and it worked, until it didn't. In 1580, Spain conquered Portugal. This created a serious problem. Spain and the Dutch Republic were already fighting the 80 Years' War. The Spanish crown had no interest in helping Dutch merchants get rich. So Spain effectively slammed the door shut. No more easy access to Portuguese spices. No more comfortable profits. No more business as usual. Amsterdam suddenly faced a future without the trade that had made it wealthy. The Dutch had two choices: accept defeat, or go find the spices themselves. Being Dutch merchants, they chose the second option. In 1595, a merchant named Cornelis de Houtman convinced investors he could reach the legendary Spice Islands. The proposal sounded ambitious, perhaps a little reckless. In reality, it was both. Investors poured money into the project. Ships were purchased, crews were assembled, supplies were loaded, and the Dutch set out toward the unknown. The expedition sailed with 4 ships and hundreds of men. Many had never traveled such distances. Few understood the route. Almost none understood what waited for them. The voyage quickly became a disaster. Scurvy spread through the ships. Men lost their teeth. Others went blind. Disease and starvation became constant companions. Fresh water spoiled. Food supplies rotted. Storms battered the fleet. Tensions grew. Months turned into years. Every mile came at a terrible cost. Yet somehow, the fleet reached Java in modern-day Indonesia, and then immediately created new problems. Dutch traders arrived expecting profits. Local rulers expected diplomacy. Neither side got what they wanted. De Houtman proved remarkably talented at offending nearly everyone he met. Negotiations collapsed. Relationships deteriorated. Trade opportunities disappeared. Potential allies became enemies. At one point, he even found himself imprisoned. Dutch companies were competing so aggressively that they were destroying their own margins. Everyone was chasing the same treasure, and everyone was getting in each other's way. The Dutch government watched rival companies undercut one another and came to a conclusion. Perhaps competition should disappear. And that decision would change global history forever.